Lizzie Borden took an axe and gave her mother 40 whacks. When she saw what she had done, she gave her father 41.
Welcome to Friday Night Ghost Frights. I'm author and ghost historian Mike Ricksecker. Explore with us. The case of Lizzie Borden is one of the most notorious in all of America. Did she really kill her parents? Or was it somebody else? And is her house really haunted? Is it possible there may even be a Lizzie Borden haunting in another state entirely? Let's explore. On August 4th, 1892, Lizzie Borden discovered her father on their sitting room couch with his head bashed in, and she screamed for the maid, Maggie. Police and doctors arrived, and the body of Abby, her stepmother, was discovered upstairs shortly thereafter. The scene was wild and unpredictable. The police in Fall River, Massachusetts had never dealt with such a case before. In fact, Lizzie was given morphine on the scene to calm her nerves, and people were milling in and out of the house. In today's investigations, this would have completely compromised the scene. Heck, the autopsies were conducted right there in the sitting room, and it was determined that there was about an hour-and-a-half difference between the death of her father and the death of her stepmother, Abby. So what really happened in the Borden home in Fall River, Massachusetts in 1892? Well, let's take a little bit of a step back and set the scene. At this point in her life, Lizzie was 32 years old. Her mother had died when she was 2 years old, and her older sister, Emma, had promised to take care of Lizzie and raise her. Well, their father, Andrew, remarried when Lizzie was 5 years old. However, Lizzie never really accepted their stepmother, Abby, as their mother and continued to look to Emma as her mother. Her father, Andrew, was a local businessman from the prominent Borden family. However, Andrew's particular line didn't inherit the Borden money. He worked for his money. He actually became a bank president and owned several businesses around the town. However, instead of living up on the hill with the other prominent Bordens, he lived down in the working class section, and this always frustrated Lizzie. She wanted to be up there on the hill with her other family and live the genteel life. Andrew was known as a miser, always a penny pincher, and lived well below their means. In fact, most of the technology within their house was about 20 years behind the time. No indoor plumbing. They had to use the basement as a privy, these sorts of things. Lizzie and Emma would on occasion go up the hill to visit their cousins and play some board games. However, they never partook in any of the balls and therefore were never really afforded any opportunities for courtship. And they were spinsters well into their 30s, for Emma, her 40s. Andrew did take pity on Lizzie at one point and let her go on a European trip with her cousins. However, this only seemed to fuel Lizzie's fire, and she became even more frustrated when she came back, having gotten that taste, a little bit of a tease of that upscale lifestyle, and then have to be thrust right back into the working class section of Fall River. Then there was the incident with Abby's half-sister. Abby's half-sister was about to be evicted from her home, and Andrew, totally out of character for him, actually bought his wife's half-sister a new house for her to move into. Lizzie and Emma cried foul at this, again being 32 and 42, and having not received any such generosity from their father. Again, he was known as a miser, and pretty much their only social outlet was church and school as they were growing up. Lizzie was a very well-known Sunday school teacher at the time. So Andrew took the house that he had inherited from his father and sold it to the girls for $1. That is the house that is now infamous. While they were living there a couple days before the infamous murders, there was a strange case of food poisoning that affected the entire household. This would later come into play, but even Abby had actually questioned the doctor as to whether or not somebody could have tampered with the food to make them all sick. The night before the murders, Uncle John Morse from Andrew's first wife's side had made an unexpected trip to the house and spent the night. Apparently there was some discussion with Andrew about his will, and John went on his way the next morning. Andrew went off to work. Anna was out of town. Those left in the house were Lizzie, Abby, and the maid, Bridget Sullivan, who was also known as Maggie. The last that was seen of Abby alive, she had told Bridget to go outside and wash the windows while she would go upstairs to the guest bedroom and clean up after John. She was never seen alive again. Where was Lizzie during this time? Well, according to her testimony during her inquest, she may have been ironing at this time, although her story seemed to change quite a few times. About an hour and a half later, Andrew came to the door. However, strangely, the front door was locked. Bridget, Maggie, came to the door to unlock it for him, and she swore that she heard Lizzie giggling just upstairs. Andrew came inside. He wasn't feeling well, still feeling some of the side effects of the food poisoning. Lizzie came in and actually helped him take off his boots, helped him with the pillow, and he laid down on the couch in the sitting room. He fell asleep and never woke again. And now we're back to Lizzie supposedly discovering her father's body. The police took a quick look at some of the quote-unquote usual suspects, but nothing panned out. They took a look at Uncle John Morse, but he had an ironclad alibi being up the hill with many of the other family members. Of course, Sister Emma was out of town. There was some thought about Bridget, otherwise known as Maggie the maid, but motive didn't make any sense. Killing her employer would have thrown her out of work. That left Lizzie, who had a lot to gain by the death of her parents, freedom and money. So Lizzie was brought in for an inquest, and her story never really seemed to match up. At some point during her story, she was downstairs ironing. At other points, she was upstairs, and then sometimes she was out in the barn looking for fishing equipment when she hadn't been fishing in 5 years. One of the problems with this inquest, though, is she was still being sedated with morphine for her nerves. When it came time for trial, this testimony was not used. There was also some additional information that was not brought into the trial, and that was of Lizzie the day before the murders, showing up at the pharmacy looking for a type of poison. She claimed that she was going to be using this acid as a cleaning agent, but she was denied access to it and she walked out. But because this acid was not found at the scene and the method of murder was with a hatchet, this testimony from the pharmacist was not used. It was not admissible. Lizzie was locked up for 10 months until her trial began, and the pastor of her church walked her into the courtroom. In fact, she generally had the backing of the local public for this trial. Questions abounded about the state of her dress and the fact that there was no blood that was actually found on her or her dress. However, there had been a sighting of Lizzie trying to burn a dress just 3 days after the murders. A friend of hers turned her in on this. She claimed it was paint, that the dress was completely unusable and therefore she was going to burn it. The very last piece of testimony by the defense was from Emma, her sister, who had returned home, of course, and testified that she had actually seen her sister burn the dress and had actually been the one to suggest that she burn the paint-covered dress. Whether Emma was lying for her sister or not, we don't know. But until her dying day, she stuck by that story. People forget, but Lizzie Borden was acquitted of the murders of her father and her stepmother and was set free. However, even though she was set free and a cheer went up from the courtroom, she still suffered a type of sentencing. You see, while the citizens of Fall River may have been polling for Lizzie Borden to win the trial, it still seems that they believe that she did it. It would have been a black mark on the community, on the town of Fall River, on the prominent Borden family throughout the town. And if Lizzie was convicted, she would have been hung. And the last time a woman in Massachusetts had been hung, it was Bathsheba Spooner, who had been pregnant when she was hung. We don't want to bring up that nasty bit of history. So Lizzie was ostracized from the community. Nobody wanted anything to do with her. In fact, when she'd go to church, people wouldn't even sit in the pews next to her, let alone next to her. She and Emma moved into a new big house up on the hill just like Lizzie always wanted, but they were reclusive. Lizzie friended people from out of town, mostly that were involved with the theater. And when Lizzie held big parties at the house for her theater friends, it was frowned upon by the community. In fact, it was even frowned upon by Emma, who eventually packed up, moved away, and never talked to her sister, Lizzie, again. Lizzie's mother figure was now gone as well. Oddly enough, though, when Lizzie died in 1927, her sister Emma died just 9 days later. Over the years, Lizzie's story has turned into folklore and nursery rhymes, jump rope songs, and, of course, the great scary ghost stories. And it is believed that the Lizzie Borden house in Fall River, where the murders occurred, is haunted. People have seen the apparitions of Andrew and Abby walking about the house. Sometimes Lizzie is seen there as well, and even on occasion, Maggie the maid. Former and current owners have reported lights going on and off throughout the house, doors opening and closing on their own with the sound of footsteps following. Sometimes there are shadows seen up and down the stairs. And at other times while walking throughout the home, guests have experienced unseen people brushing past them. Disembodied voices are also heard throughout the house. Not related to the Andrew and Abby Borden murders, there were other murders related to the Borden family long beforehand in the house that attribute to some of the hauntings. In 1848, Eliza Darling Borden dropped 2 of her 3 children down the basement water cistern, drowned them. Then she promptly went upstairs and took a straight razor to her own throat. People have reported seeing the 2 young children there in the house and have reportedly heard them playing with marbles. But it's the legend of Lizzie Borden that takes center stage at that house in Fall River, and her legend has permeated throughout all of our society. In fact, could it even be possible that remnants of her spirit haunt elsewhere? One night when I was investigating the Stone Lion Inn in Guthrie, Oklahoma, I was climbing the stairs. Another girl was starting just up the staircase behind me when all of a sudden a framed photograph came crashing down to the stairs off the wall. That framed photograph was of Lizzie Borden. Was it just a coincidence? Was it a spirit attached to the Guthrie house, the Stone Lion Inn? Or was it actually Lizzie Borden reaching out and knocking off her own photograph? Like with the murder case, you just never know when it comes to Lizzie Borden. Thank you for watching Friday Night Ghost Frights. Please let us know what you thought of this video in the comments below, and if you have not yet, please subscribe and click that bell icon for notifications. I'm Mike Ricksecker. Until next Friday night.